timely meeting. Donald Trump visits Mexico's president hours before he delivers a major speech on immigration. Primary picks: how some lesser-known races shape Congress and affect the pro-life agenda. Powerful storms. Tropical weather threatens Americans from Florida to Hawaii. And more Vatican reforms, how they fit with the Pope's vision for the Church. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, August 31st, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Donald Trump meets with Mexico's president ahead of tonight's major immigration speech. Political director Lauren Ashburn reports from the White House. Lauren?
Brian, a very different tone from Donald Trump this afternoon as he tries to repair his image among Hispanics. It's been a year of talking tough on deportations, saying Mexico needs to pay for a wall and calling Mexicans rapists. Today, he said his meeting with President Enrique Peña Nieto was open and honest. He called him a friend, and he complimented Mexican citizens.
Mexicans are just beyond reproach. Spectacular, spectacular, hardworking people. I have such great respect for them and their strong values of family, faith, and community.
Donald Trump said he did talk about building a wall, but not about who's going to pay for it. Now, the meeting comes just hours before he's set to give a much-anticipated illegal immigration speech in Arizona. It's been a defining issue of his presidential campaign, but also one on which he's appeared to waver in recent days. Donald Trump arrived in Mexico this afternoon, in a country where he is widely despised. So much so that this morning a former Mexican president apologized for the invitation.
It's a very opportunistic move, and I hope U.S. public opinion, U.S. citizens can see this and finally see what is behind Trump, this false prophet that is just cheating everybody. It's a desperate move, and I don't see how it can work at all.
Trump responded to Fox with this tweet. Former President Vicente Fox, who is railing against my visit to Mexico today, also invited me when he apologized for using the F-bomb. Fox responded, I invited you to come to Mexico and apologize to all Mexicans. Stop lying. Mexico is not yours to play with. Show some respect. At the American Legion's annual convention in Ohio, his critic-in-chief, Hillary Clinton, says it's too little, too late for a visit.
And it certainly takes more than trying to make up for a year of insults and insinuations by dropping in on our neighbors for a few hours and then flying home again. That is not how it works.
After saying during the Republican primary that Trump would use a deportation force to expel 11 million illegal aliens living in the U.S., he suggested last week he could soften that stance, and tonight's speech is expected to clarify just where he stands on this thorny issue. Turning now to down-ballot races on the state level, Senators John McCain and Marco Rubio both won their primary battles last night. Jason Calvi is here with more. Jason.
Lauren, there are 9 Senate seats that are considered very competitive for the fall. That's according to the Cook Political Report. And 8 of those 9 are currently held by Republicans. Democrats need to net win just 4 seats plus the White House to take control of the Senate. Tonight, pro-lifers are fighting.
Marco Rubio wins his Senate primary, backed by 72% of Florida Republicans. It's a race he originally planned to sit out.
But I just couldn't be at peace with the idea that we were going to not just potentially lose a Senate seat, but lose the balance of power in the Senate at this critical moment in our nation's history, with a vacancy on the Supreme Court.
Rubio faces Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy this November. Nearly 120 pro-lifers with the Susan B. Anthony list are helping Rubio. They already knocked on 250,000 doors in Florida. They say it was a winning strategy in 2014.
The message bearer is, if it's your neighbor, is a little bit more trustworthy than a mailer or perhaps an ad that you just happen to stumble upon. So the person-to-person, frankly, it's an apostolic approach to doing this, and it actually works. So that's why we're doing it.
In Arizona, Senator John McCain defeated his Republican challenger, getting 52% of the vote.
Thank you all.
McCain faces a tough race this November.
In every close Senate race where there is a difference, the Republican candidate is the pro-life candidate. The Democrat candidate is the pro-abortion candidate.
The Democratic platform this year calls for the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, which bans taxpayer funds for abortion.
By a conservative estimate, the Hyde Amendment saved over 1 million lives.
That's why pro-life groups fight to protect it by reaching out to millions of voters.
When we go to a Hispanic household and say Hillary Clinton is for late-term taxpayer-funded abortion, they don't like it, and often they didn't know it.
And the Susan B. Anthony list is knocking on doors in Ohio, North Carolina, and in Florida. There were several House races, primary races last night that we were watching, including that of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the former chair of the DNC. She did beat the Bernie Sanders-backed rival. Brian?
Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill, thank you. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. President Obama leaves Washington for Lake Tahoe, then to Hawaii, China, and beyond. The president's two-day environmental tour with stops in Nevada and Hawaii showcases his administration's conservation efforts. He then plans to meet with other world leaders at the G20 summit in China, followed by a trip to Laos. He is the first sitting president to visit that Southeast Asian country. The White House does not expect President Obama's schedule to be affected by tropical weather taking aim at Hawaii. The National Weather Service has issued a hurricane warning for the Big Island. Hurricane Madeline is losing some strength but could still cause widespread damage. The president is scheduled to visit the island of Oahu this week. Tropical weather also threatens Florida. A tropical depression brewing in the Gulf of Mexico could generate heavy rain, strong wind, and possibly tornadoes. Florida's governor has already declared a state of emergency for 42 counties. A third tropical storm should spare North Carolina. It's been spinning off the coast since Sunday, kicking up heavy surf. The tropical depression is now moving out to sea, a relief to people in the Outer Banks. Japan is hit by a deadly, destructive storm. A powerful typhoon just hit northern Japan. It left at least 9 people dead. Police say the victims were found in a home for the elderly in a town swamped by flooding. Rescue crews are still trying to save hundreds of others stranded by rising waters and landslides. After Monday's massive migrant rescue by Italy's Coast Guard, the Spanish Navy rescues more than 1,000 people off Libya's coast Tuesday. The operation began early in the morning in response to reports that many boats had left the Libyan coast with migrants. The Spanish Navy later disabled those boats so the traffickers can't use them again. The rescue ship is delivering the migrants to an Italian port. The first commercial flight between the U.S. and Cuba in more than half century lands in Santa Clara this morning. Cheers broke out in the cabin of JetBlue Flight 387 as the plane touched down in the central Cuban city. The passengers were mostly airline executives, U.S. government officials, and journalists. The arrival reestablishes regular air service that was severed at the height of the Cold War. About 300 flights a week are scheduled between these two countries. Pope Francis praises Colombia's peace deal, which ends one of the world's longest-running conflicts. He pledges his support for the pact reached between the government and Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Under the agreement, rebels who confess their crimes could get reduced sentences by helping rebuild communities hit by the conflict. The Holy Father declined an invitation for a Vatican envoy to help select judges for this proposed Truth and Justice Commission. Pope Francis shows his profound concern for refugees. He assumes direct responsibility for migrant issues in a new Vatican department or dicastery that merges 4 Vatican offices into one. EWTN senior contributor Dr. Matthew Bunson is a theologian and historian. What is a dicastery and what will this one cover, Matthew?
Yeah, well, a dicastery, simply put, is a Vatican office. It's one of the departments in the Roman Curia that assists the Pope in governing the whole of the Universal Church. There are different types of departments. You have congregations and pontifical councils. What this one does is to pull together 4 separate pontifical councils under one umbrella. And it's called integral development as its title. But realistically, the way to look at this is the application in a real-world sense of Catholic social teaching. So it's going to be concerned with the plight of migrants, of the unemployed, of those who are suffering, those who are forgotten, those who are facing natural disasters. All of it under one umbrella.
Who will head it and why do you think he was chosen?
Yeah, Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana, who is currently the head of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, will be the head of it. He is a well-known figure, certainly in the Vatican. He was one of the primary figures in the creation, the drafting of the Pope's rather controversial but important encyclical Laudato Si. So he's been a point man for a lot of Pope Francis's teachings on integral development and integral ecology.
Why would the Holy Father then personally oversee the migrant issue?
This has been an issue from the very start of great importance to Francis. Consider that right now there are about 250 million people on the move as migrants, as refugees. They are on the peripheries. This is Francis at his core, worrying about the forgotten, the marginalized, taking the church out into the peripheries. And so he wants to oversee directly the work of this new dicastery, this new office, in making sure that they're cared for by the church.
Very interesting development. I wonder if we might expect to see more of these consolidations in the Curia reform, or are we about through with them?
This is probably the most significant of the changes that were anticipated. I think if we look for anything, it will be bringing together the different offices of evangelization on the part of the Vatican sometime in the next year, but probably nothing of this seismic dimension that we've had in the last year.
Are they on track to what you expected?
It's exactly what we had expected from Pope Francis. Putting the Roman Curia, the central government of the Church, at the service of the Church to effectively care for those around the world.
Dr. Matthew Bunson, we always appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Coming up, Care of Creation, the focus of tomorrow's World Day of Prayer. And Mother Teresa's miracles, those special blessings confirming her sainthood. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday, August 31st. I'm Brian Patrick. Hundreds of thousands gather in Rome Sunday for the canonization of Blessed Mother Teresa. Her path to sainthood was solidified by 2 miracles attributed to her intercession. Wyatt Goolsby reports.
Brian, the Holy Father has made Mother Teresa's canonization a highlight of his Jubilee Year of Mercy, but her being declared a saint wouldn't be possible without 2 very special blessings.
We have picked up from the streets more than 40,000 people.
Mother Teresa won admirers around the world for her joy-filled dedication to the poor. The Albanian nun is also known for her founding the Missionaries of Charity, a religious order based in India. Father Brian Kolodechuk spearheaded the effort to make Mother Teresa a saint.
Pope Francis, I think Mother is this example of the things he wants to emphasize, this mercy of going out, seeing the people.
But Kolodechuk says humanitarian work is not enough to be declared a saint in the Catholic Church. Normally, a candidate must be associated with at least 2 miracles. Her first miracle took place in 1998, 1 year after her death. This Indian woman, Monica Besra, says a stomach tumor disappeared one day after she prayed with a locket containing Mother Teresa's picture. Besra describes how she saw a sudden flash of light from Mother Teresa's picture. She says she had to close her eyes and her heart started pounding. In 2002, Pope John Paul II recognized the experience as a miracle. In 2003, she was beatified as Blessed Teresa of Calcutta. But it wasn't until December of 2015 that Pope Francis recognized her second miracle.
No dia 9 de dezembro, acordei com uma forte dor de cabeça.
Marcilio Andrino from Brazil says in 2008 doctors gave him no hope of surviving several brain tumors, but his wife Fernanda continually prayed for his survival and believes Mother Teresa interceded while he was in intensive care. Mother Teresa is known for loving those who are often forgotten, including beggars, prostitutes, and street children. But Andrino says she's still looking out for all of God's children from heaven.
The Vatican has an extensive process of investigating alleged miracles. In fact, the Church has invited skeptics to challenge them. Now, these 2 miracles associated with Mother Teresa, for example, had to be verified with doctors that there was no other medical explanation. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby, thank you. And the Holy Father focuses on faith as he teaches pilgrims attending today's general audience in St. Peter's Square. Alan Holdren, Rome Bureau Chief for EWTN's Catholic News Agency, joining us. Alan, what did the Holy Father teach about faith at the general audience today?
Well, Brian, he spoke about the woman who suffered from hemorrhages, from blood loss, who was rejected by the population. She was considered to be a discarded individual, Pope Francis said. But she looks to Jesus with faith. She braves the crowd. She goes out and she grabs onto his garments and he feels it. He turns around and he looks on her with tenderness, a look that she hadn't seen for a long time, Pope Francis says. And he says that you are saved because of your faith. So this applies to us today.
And speaking off the cuff, how did he reflect on fear of rejection because of our own sins?
He says that often internally we feel rejected because of our sins, and he says that Jesus tells us to come to him and to look for his mercy. He says that this is a moment of grace when we seek Christ's mercy. It's a moment of inclusion in the church, of also encounter with Jesus Christ. And he says it's a moment that everyone should take advantage of. He said it's a time of mercy. And that moment of mercy, of course, during this Jubilee year, this is the moment, so to speak.
Is there any more news on when the Holy Father might visit earthquake victims?
We haven't heard anything from him today. This is his first public audience since he said that he would be going as soon as possible last Sunday at the Angelus. We know that he's anxious to go there. He said he wants to share a moment with the victims and also to pray for those people who were killed.
And finally, Alan, how are things coming together for Mother Teresa's canonization celebration on Sunday?
Well, Brian, everybody is arriving at this point. We've got pilgrims and faithful coming in droves, a lot of missionaries and charities on the street here, which is Mother Teresa's order. But there is also a sort of a muted celebration because of that earthquake. One of the events of the official Jubilee has been canceled on Saturday evening. So people are celebrating, but solemnly here. But there is definitely a lot of celebration for future Saint Mother Teresa.
We hear the work going on around you. Alan Holdren with the Catholic News Agency joining us from Rome. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
And tomorrow is the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. Pope Francis initiated the observance last year. Its purpose is to thank God for his earthly gifts and to pray for the protection of the environment. Dan Misla is the Executive Director of the Catholic Climate Covenant. Dan, how do you suggest Catholics approach this observance, if you will?
Well, I think exactly what Pope Francis is calling for, which is to pray, to get back in touch with, he calls it our spiritual patrimony of our gift, the gift that God has given to us, which is all of creation, and begin to reflect a little bit more deeply about that. This goes back to Genesis, and so we've been at this a while. I think we forgot that we've been at this a while.
As pro-life people, how can we connect this care for creation with the care for life?
Well, I think, we live on this planet, and how we take care of this planet will determine the quality of our lives. From everything from pollution that impacts the baby in the womb to, living on a planet that is increasingly threatened by our own activities in our own hand. And so I think we need to take much better care of creation in order that we can promote all life.
What is this month-long season of creation about?
There's some groups that have sort of extended it from the 1st of September, the Day of Prayer for Creation, to the Feast of St. Francis on October 4th, the patron saint of those who promote ecology, as named by John Paul II. So I think that's it's a time of year when we do really appreciate the harvest, for instance, of the farms, and especially in the northern hemisphere, it's fall, and in the southern hemisphere, it's spring, and so creation is producing its fruits in many ways. And so why don't we just extend that for an entire month leading up to the Feast of St. Francis?
Pope Francis has been a champion of this cause. How has his involvement helped people become more aware?
Well, I think, he left us this enormous gift last June a year ago, with Laudato Si, to care for our common home. So I think that a lot of us are still trying to digest that enormously powerful document. But he's also talked about this quite a bit. And earlier in the show, you had a segment on this new dicastery on integral human development, and he uses the word integral ecology in the encyclical. So he's beginning to link all of these things together and saying you can't do one without the other.
All right, Dan Misla, Executive Director of Catholic Climate Covenant. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the business of medicine, a closer look at the debate over drug prices. And fit for Christ.
As we
Catholics glorify God by building up their hearts, minds, and bodies. Thanks so much for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis addresses the World Congress of the European Society of Cardiology today. The Congress is meeting in Rome, exploring the role of teamwork care for patients with cardiovascular illness. I thank each of you for the scientific work, but above all for your dedication to so many who are sick, the Holy Father said. He continued, the magisterium of the Church has always affirmed the importance of scientific research for human life and health. He concludes, I ask the Lord to bless your research and medical care so that everyone may receive relief from their suffering, a greater quality of life, and an increasing sense of hope. 20 Democratic senators question steep price hikes for the life-saving EpiPen injector. In a letter to drug maker Mylan, they say the increases of more than 500% jeopardize access to emergency allergy shots. Mylan responds by promising a cheaper generic version of the EpiPen. Dr. Peter Jaworski teaches business ethics at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. Why is EpiPen so expensive?
The EpiPen is so expensive for a number of different reasons, most important of which is the fact that Mylan had an opportunity to raise the prices, and they took that opportunity. And the reason why they had that opportunity is because there's very little competition in this field. AviQ, which was a major competitor to the EpiPen, they had problems with the dosage device, and so they issued a voluntary recall. There are also significant regulatory hurdles that make it very difficult for competitors to enter the space.
So Mylan basically has a monopoly on this product.
Essentially, they do, yes.
Does this compare with Martin Shkreli being criticized last year for increasing their drug prices?
There are definite similarities. What you have here is a vulnerable group of consumers who need that product. They can't go elsewhere, they need it, and so they have to pay the price, whatever that price is. That's a similarity, but there are some significant differences too, and we should note those. First of all, Martin Shkreli, he was unapologetic. He seemed unsympathetic, he seemed callous and smug. The response from Mylan is very different so far. They at least appear to be backtracking and appear like they care about their customers and about expressing the right values.
So the price of a 2-pack went to like $608. They're going to find a way to cut that, offering a generic form and also some kind of discounts. Is that an adequate response in your opinion?
You know, to be honest, Brian, I'm baffled by the response of Mylan. Initially, they offered a coupon to make it cheaper for certain consumers to be able to purchase the EpiPen. Now they are promising to take their product, which is essentially a generic product. Epinephrine, the medical substance, is generic, and they're promising to make a generic version of their generic product.
For half the price.
For half the price, which makes very little sense to me. I can't make heads or tails out of it.
Interesting perspective. Peter Jaworski with Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. Thanks for being with us, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Well, faith and fitness merge as people look for alternative exercise options. Mark Irons reports on a new trend that may have you running to Mass.
An hour before sunrise, people fill the parking lot at St. Mark's Catholic Church in Hyattsville, Maryland.
You do realize it's 5 a.m.
I do, yeah.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
This meeting starts with prayer, but it's unlike most church functions.
Is there going to be coffee and donuts?
No, there's not, as far as I know.
Bend at the hips. Take it
More than 30 people show up for a physical,
as we forgive those,
and spiritual boot camp.
Switch.
California transplant Larry Lee runs Fit for Christ. He wanted to start an exercise program with greater purpose.
Here, what we're doing it for is the glory of God, and our bodies are temples for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
The American Council on Exercise reports an increase in faith-based fitness programs as a top trend in 2016. This Atlanta area church congregation plays gospel music during workouts.
The scripture says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper and be in health, just as your soul prospers."
As light dawns on St. Mark's, the workout concludes, and Pastor Roberto Cortez gives a blessing.
Father, the Son,
he's seen the fruits of his labor.
It's just an amazing experience to all of us. And since I've come into Fit for Christ, I have lost 15 pounds.
And soon to be 74-year-old Elaine Kuyaba has a confession to make.
I feel like I want to quit. Yeah, I do.
But her faith keeps her moving.
When things get tough, you ask God to help you keep going.
Having the community, having the support, we go through it together.
2, 1. By taking care of our bodies, we are glorifying God, keeping in mind that's not the most important thing. These bodies will pass. These bodies will return to dust. But what's inside is what grows, is what we must also nurture.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Mark, for finding another great story for us. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We'll leave you tonight looking back at the Pope's weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square today. Good night. God bless.